I'm from the Bronx, New York. I was born and raised within walking distance of Yankee Stadium, which is why I'm an Indians and Browns fan. And all my fellow fans are from Cleveland. It all happened because my idol as a kid was Bob Feller, the Indians Hall of Fame pitcher. That's simple. In the Bronx. And then I went to college in New York, and I went to trade school, automotive trade school in Queens, borough of Queens. Delahanty Institute, just a private trade school. A long time ago, but it was a pretty good trade school, had a good reputation. One of the teachers later headed the Ford Lincoln Mercury Training Center in New Jersey, and we became good friends, and he helped me out on a lot of things when I became a journalist years later. Well, we had done some air conditioning on a few luxury foreign cars when we had the shop in New Jersey, and I did some writing on it for a trade publication that was edited by a man named Stan Rodman, who later became the executive director for NARSA, the National Automotive Radio Service Association. But when that trade publication was discontinued, and I continued writing because I was writing for Pop Mechanics, and it turned out to be somewhat more profitable than working on foreign cars in the 60s, which is what we were doing. But I get a call from Stan saying he was now working for this trade association on cooling systems, NARSA, and he had somebody who wanted to meet me. So okay, he came to my house with this rotund gentleman whom I actually had to learn to pronounce his name, and it was Simon Ulahojan, who then told me that he had wanted me to do tech writing on cooling systems for the trade association. I said, well, I've done more, stuff on air conditioning. He said, well, that's okay. Our guys also do that, so it'll work out. And then, of course, I did that for a number of years, and then he started Mobile Air Conditioning Society, and that's how I came to work for the Mobile Air Conditioning Society. And I started doing the what was then a tech service publication called R12 that later became MACS Service Reports. And so I have a copy of every one of those issues, starting with Book 1, Issue 1. And so that's how I started working for NARSA. I did a little bit of both, and then a friend of mine wanted to, open up a shop, and his experience was foreign cars, then very foreign. And so we had this shop in New Jersey, and it was in an area that had a certain number of foreign cars, but not enough to support us in the style that we would like to become accustomed. And eventually we just weren't making enough money at it, and closed the shop. And in the meantime, a guy I'd become friendly with had gotten a big job at Purelator Filters. So I called him to congratulate him, and he said, what are you doing? I said, well, we just closed the shop. He said, hey, why don't you do work for me? I just started this new job, and then I started working for Purelator. And I did work for them on a contract basis for many years. In that interim, I started working for NARSA, and then, of course, later on, I started working for MACS. Oh, no, I did stuff for Pop Mechanics. That was my, first freelance article, writing job, yeah. Well, starting with part mechanics was actually pretty simple. I sent in a query to the automotive editor, and he said yes. I sent in the article, sent him another query. He said yes. I wrote that one. There were two articles on, one was on hard starting, and the other one I think was on stalling, something like that, which was their general, you know, a lot of the stuff they did. And that's how I started. I worked for them for many, many years. I also started then working for Motor Magazine. Hey, I figured it was a lot easier than getting up early in the morning and slinging wrenches, tell you that. I said, hey, this is a way to make a living. We would, you know, they say we didn't have the issue of, you know, trying to find customers. There were only a handful, and when they said yes, you got paid. That was it. I started out, actually did work for a newspaper for a while. That was also not very profitable. That's when I said, well, when this friend of mine wanted to open the shop, I said, sure. It was interesting. What happened was, I guess it was Elvis who said, hey, you know, we got a lot of things going on, air conditioning, in the SAE committee. I knew Ward from his, you know, work with MACS. And so he said, why don't you know, start covering the SAE meetings for us, you know, going there. So that's how that started. I went to the big meeting that they had on retrofit, you know, and that whole subject was big stuff back in around 1990. And we had to do documents on retrofit. I ended up having to, you know, get OE retrofit recommendations, which I had service contacts with most of the car manufacturers, except one manufacturer didn't want to give me the stuff. Oh, we haven't got it ready yet. Well, you'll have to wait, and all that sort of stuff. And that was Chrysler. Well, one time, it was, I forget which model year it was, but it was around 1991, maybe, 1990. I did an annual visit to all the car manufacturers to get new car material for Popular Mechanics. And I always, when I went to a car manufacturer, I always got in to see the engineers on HVAC, just as part of covering it, both for part mechanics and for whatever I could get for NARSA and MACS. Well, I included Chrysler in the thing, and the PR guy for Chrysler brings me into the meeting with Chrysler's two honchos on air conditioning, one of whom was Angelo Patti, who is now took a buyout from Chrysler and went to work at Ford, and is now the chairman of the SAE Interior Climate Control Standards Committee. So Angelo and I go back a long way. And that was an interesting meeting because I hadn't been able to get anything out of Angelo or his cohort, a guy named Flavio Stopa. So I go into this meeting, and the PR guy, who would normally just leave me there and take off, sits down. I said, gee, I wonder why he's staying around. He must decide he wants to know more about air conditioning. So I start asking questions, and all the things that Angelo had been stonewalling me on, he's answering in the most full detail that I'd ever seen. And I said, gee, my interviewing technique must be getting much better. And Angelo and Flavio are giving me everything I asked for and then some. After about an hour, I'm convinced I'm wonderful. And the PR guy says, well, you know, you've been here quite a while, and these guys have to get back to work. Okay, I had so much material, I couldn't believe it. And then I didn't know that they had been told, whatever this guy asks, tell him, unless he gets into the subject of alternate refrigerant replacements for R12. Why? Because a member of the board of directors of Chrysler had talked Chrysler into agreeing to have engineering test this blend refrigerant from some company that his friends ran. This is a Friday, and they knew that if the story broke, it would affect the stock market. So they wanted to keep that secret. So anything I asked on outside of that area, they were going to answer because they were under instructions. And that's why the guy was sitting there, to make sure that we never got into the subject of drop-in replacements for R12. Monday, the story breaks about this Chrysler agreement to test an alternate refrigerant. And both Ward and I got loads of calls on it, and we all said basically the same thing. It's a blend and it isn't going anywhere. And in a few days, the stock, dropped like a rock. It did end up being offered. It was something called Frigic. And it did end up being offered on the market, and some company took it on and tried to market it. Of course, it never really went anywhere. And none of them did, because we had R134A. And we knew R134A was going to be the replacement. As a matter of fact, we knew about R134A many years earlier, when it was a laboratory refrigerant. And it was put on the shelf because we had R12. But we knew if we ever had to get rid of R12, we had 134A as a likely replacement. Of course, other work was being done, but as you saw from that book I wrote in the 70s, we knew about R134A even then. And it then, once we had to get rid of R12, the testing on 134A began in earnest. And as I say, we had the first changeover in 1991, but we were working on the whole subject of retrofit in 1990, I guess, 89 and 90. Lots. I've worked on I was the guy who did all the equipment standards. I did on leak detection and refrigerant recovery and recycling. I chaired the service committee, which is the one that was responsible for the standards, from 2003 until I finally got Peter Cole to agree to take the championship in, 2015. And he started in 2016. No, I did some work on 2791. I did 2791 with Bill Jamo of Ford. I was responsible for the development of 2788, which is 134A recovery, recycling, recharge equipment, which was because we were new in that area, first getting into really specific requirements. It was a monster job. It took a few years, and the arguments were fast and furious with all the requirements. Most of these companies were saying, "Oh God, it's going to be too expensive. You're going to drive us into bankruptcy," and all that stuff. And of course, it wasn't going to happen. We didn't make it, too pricey, and we got some specific performance requirements that I felt were necessary for service shops. Oh, well, they were, they're all compromises, because SAE's deal is you have to build consensus for every standard. You can't just automatically say, well, this is the way it should be, therefore this is the way I'm going to push it through. You have to build consensus, and it has to pass a vote. And if there's objections, you have to address every single, objection and satisfy the objector on it. It's not like, you can run a dictatorship. We had so many meetings on 2788. I had to sign off on the latest version. And of course, each version there was somebody objecting to something, and it would end up as long meetings. That was the toughest standard I think we could, we did. But we got in some, significant performance requirements. A lot of I got people to help me on it. Specifically, Frank Rogers at GM agreed to do a lot of the testing work for us and give us, so we had his research. We had individual, who also provided some research work. Specifically, Gary Murray of Robinair did run some tests that he showed us the results of. And, but it was tough getting little things through. Like, nobody had ever wanted to put in a scale calibration before. That's, oh, come on, it's gonna be, that was one requirement I had to, literally argue through. The 95% recovery requirement was not overly, popular from the standpoint of manufacturers having to meet it, but I knew it could be met from some of the work that Frank had done. We saw it could be done, and turned out everybody could do it if they just, did a good recovery algorithm, and they did. But that was the biggest thing, because we found out some of that early equipment was maybe recovering, if it did that, 50% to the refrigerant. It was really bad stuff. And we knew we had to do much, much better. And that was a tough deal. And the final, little diddly issues came while we were on, my wife and I were on vacation in Europe. And when I went away, I said, I'm gonna be away, I'm not taking my computer with me. I may check my email on a hotel computer, but I can't really do anything while I'm on vacation. And naturally, while I was on vacation, EPA sent in an email, you've gotta go through this stuff and fill in these gaps for us, because we have to get these amendments ready for the Clean Air Act. And I could read that in the email. I couldn't even open the PDF on this terrible old hotel computer I think it was in Prague, Czechoslovakia. So I said, it's gonna have to wait till I get home. And it waited, and it got done. So that was just very tough, because it was gonna go into the Clean Air Act, and dealing with the government is never easy. 2791 was actually a change in the way we did leak detection standards, because of the idea that we had to have the detector working within a very tight performance parameter, specifically not trigger on 2 grams, but actually trigger on 4 grams. That's a very tight, deal. And everybody complained how difficult that was going to be, and they all met it. And as I knew it could be done. So those two were, sort of the templates for everything we've done since, except, of course, for refrigerant identification. Refrigerant identification was complex, but we had to find out what was possible. And I was working with Peter Cole from Neutronics on that, and we got it done. But that was not the most, that was not a particularly difficult standard, because we did, anytime we had a question on something, we could get it checked out at Neutronics to see if it was feasible. Yeah, I did the writing on all the standards, because a lot of the guys couldn't write a simple English declarative sentence. That's always a problem. But, it got done. A little bit in college. I was on the college newspaper I don't know how, much of a knack it is. It's a craft that you learn. I've been doing it long enough. And as I say, it beats getting up early in the morning and slinging wrenches, particularly on a 2-degree day in the winter. Particularly as you get older, it's a lot easier to, do stuff in nice warm weather when you're doing it, and not have to do it. That's what makes air conditioning nice because you're doing it in warm weather. In September 1971, we had just moved into a new house that was basically practically no furniture in it, and that's when I got the call from Stan Rodman, who had been, the editor of this, magazine, this newspaper for service stations, and he told me that he was now doing NARSA, and he wanted to talk to me about doing work for this trade association. And as I say, he came up there. I didn't know, I knew him. I didn't know Simon Ulahojian, of course, until that night.
What do you see happening with the future of air conditioning and automotive?
Well, air conditioning, like everything else, I think is going to go even more electronic. Including the development of cold air from heat pumps, and the technology is already out there in the form of Peltier junction systems. Peltier junction, for those who aren't familiar with it, is the way you heat and cool seats. It's an electronic heat pump, and there are materials being experimented with that give much better performance. The problem now is the cost for the performance is not there yet. But with cars coming in now more and more with zoned systems, you can have a Peltier junction cooling focused only on a driver, which means it uses a little over 1/4 of the cooling power, and that gets it close to the parity that we need with regular vapor refrigeration systems, which have right now a 3-to-1 efficiency advantage over a Peltier junction, the heated cooled seat type of cooling. And so there's a lot of experimentation being done in that area. They haven't got it to the point where those more efficient systems are cost effective, but it'll happen. And how far down the road is it? I don't know, but once it happens, we won't be worrying about chemical refrigerants anymore. Is that 15 years ahead? Is it 20 years? I don't know. They're still looking for the perfect material, or the better material that gets him closer on efficiency. But as I say, with zoning of the systems, you pick up parity on a system. In other words, if you're only using cooling 1/4 of the car, namely the passenger, the driver, well, then you don't have to use, all 4/4 of the capacity of the system, and that gets you a higher efficiency overall percentage. That's the big change. But of course, all these systems are now being integrated into totally thermal managed cars. And that's a big deal, because right now we just run the air conditioning, and some cars have heat pumps, but now we're going into waste heat recovery, and that's becoming a big deal. And at some point, you're also going to see your condensers going through water cooling, and it's being done in there's a lot of work on that. In other words, when you cool the system with, when you cool the condenser with coolant, that can be a lot more effective in condensing refrigerant than running it through outside air. That's where a lot of work is being done, and there are cars in Europe that are running with experimental systems, and I assume there are some here in the U.S. with water cooling and condensers. Well, it's like engine coolant, yeah. They run through a separate cooling loop in all these cases. They're not using engine coolant, which is at 190, 200 degrees. They're using a separate cooling loop, and you can see more of that coming in, because we've got evidence from research work that's been published by SAE that shows it increases AC efficiency. For the longest time, my hobby was driving cars, and I spent 18 or 19 years as a North American Car of the Year juror. I've been a member of IMPA for eons. I joined it like 2 years after it started. I've been a member ever since. I was on the board of directors. I was a membership chairman for like 25 years, which was long enough. But the automotive press changed so much in that time. In other words, we used to have guys who were automotive journalists. That was their occupation. Today we've got guys who do it as a part-time thrill because they want to drive new cars. They're willing to spend their time and money to do it. It's not a way of making a living for them. A lot of them, they have what we call day jobs that really pay the bills, or they have wives who have very good day jobs, and that's how they support the hobby of being, quote, automotive journalists, end quote. It's just a change in the industry. That's where we are. So a lot of things are changing, and automotive journalism is one of them. Yeah, I was on an Acura press event. I covered it for Automotive Engineering, which is the SAE magazine. And the guy I was in the car with ran an Acura blog. He had a day job working for some pharmaceutical company. But he's not what I call, he's a fan, and he writes a fan blog. Well, I do an email fan blog for Indians and Browns fans in the auto industry. Done that for 18 years. Oh, my holiday card, yeah. It's what we call a rebus, which means it's an type of automotive picture puzzle using car parts and things like that. And I've been doing that ever since I was a young writer working for, I think we still had the shop then, and I was dating a greeting card artist. And she drew the first two cards, and I kept getting people to somehow, I could get to draw the card for me, because I can't draw. And then when my daughter got to be like 8 years old, I found out she could draw. And then she'd been doing the card for many, many, many years. And then I started using clip art, and it's got to the point where she keeps telling me how busy she is at work, and could I really not bother her so much with the card, because she doesn't understand what she's drawing. I just, give her some scrap art and tell her what I want done with it, and she, would fix it. But I've been able to, do it with scrap art myself and put the puzzle together. And I've got people who like it, so I'm sort of stuck with continuing it. The idea of a rebus is pretty simple. If you take the letters RE and then put a plus sign after that, and a drawing of like a school bus, it's rebus. But, and a rebus is a type of puzzle. There once was a TV show called Concentration, I understand, that had these picture puzzles, and they did that sort of thing, not automotive, but anyway, I've been doing automotive for all these years, and I've got people who just wait for this silly card every year, so I have to keep doing it. Oh yeah, I do it in a box. I've never sorted it out, but sorting them out. But yeah, I've got a copy of every card I ever did. I know everybody. You know how many people have told me that many, many years ago, the late Herb Williamson, who was not only a close friend of mine from sports car rallying, but had become a PR guy for Volkswagen. He once asked me if I would pick out like a half dozen of my favorite cars that they could publish in the consumer magazine that VW put out called Small World. And I said, nah, it's not for sale. And I never did it. So, I just felt it was not something I wanted to commercialize. That's all. It was just a personal sort of thing. And I had a lot of guys in the automotive industry who liked it and who still like it and look for it every year. They tell me it's the only card they actually look for. So it's something. The biggest fan of that card was the late Bob Stempel, who ended up as chairman of the board at General Motors. And I met him when he was a young engineer in Oldsmobile. And we just became friendly because there have never been too many automotive technical journalists around. And so I would be, with him on a number of things and talking to him. And he liked that. And he just loved the card. And he kept telling me, oh, he waits for that card every year. And then one year he says to me, stop sending me that card at the office. Here's my home address. I want you to send it to my home because otherwise I have to remember to take it home to my wife and make her figure it out. I said, you're making it? Why? Yeah. So he gave me his home address, which was very rare because Bob Stempel had his son kidnapped. And the son was recovered safe. GM paid a big ransom, most of which was recovered. But Bob was very security conscious at the time, and I think I was the only journalist who actually had his home address. And when he retired and moved to Florida, he sent me his Florida address so I could keep sending him the card. But he was in New York to do a press conference when he was head of GM. And he said to me, have you ever met my wife? I said, no. He said, she's over there. Hey, Pat, come over here, he calls to her. She comes over and he says, Pat, this is Paul Weissler. And the first words out of her mouth were, the card! So he actually was, taking it home and making her figure it out. Funny stuff. Silly little card. I once called a guy in March on some technical question, guy at GM. And the first words out of his mouth was, I never got the card this year. I said, Ed, you're on the list. I must have sent you the card. And he said, well, you could send it to me now. He was still going to get it in March. Funny, silly things. So that's why I still do it. I don't send out that many. I send it, now it's strictly an e-card because with most people I don't have a regular U.S. Post Office address for them. So it's been an e-card for the last few years. I send out, it's about 200 people. Not the biggest, everybody think, oh, there must be everybody in the world gets it. No, it's only a couple of hundred people. It goes to the people on the SAE committee that I deal with. It goes to all the people I work for. It goes to PR people and engineers. One of the biggest fans still after all these years is a guy who used to be vice president of truck engineering for GM. But, it's got its fans. It's silly, but, it is what it is. Well, it was sports car rallies. And one of the things I participated in the most was the All-Night Rally Championship Series, which was run in the Northeast, and the Northeast Winter Rally, which was run out of Maine and Massachusetts in New Hampshire. It was 24 hours in the middle of winter, so they knew they always had snow to deal with. And that was, that was one of the more fun events. We always had, driving like idiots through snow. And I had a factory, I was able to get a factory car from Chrysler, equipped with 4 studded snow tires to be able to do it, yeah. Rally enthusiasts. They were, there were some very good rally drivers who ran that event, yeah. It was a fun event to run if you were a nut. The arrangement was with the New York PR manager for Chrysler, and we took what he had, the most appropriate thing he had in the press fleet, and put 4 studded snow tires on it, and that's what we had to use. They weren't building a special car for me, so we get these cars, and we did the best we could. They were stock cars, except for the 4 spiked snow tires. Oh yeah, I mean it was mostly Dodge, because it was the guy was PR manager for Dodge. They say they were regular Dodge products of the late 60s and early 70s. I think one year we were stuck with a Dodge stop because he didn't have anything else in the fleet, and I ended up burning out the brakes, and we had to crawl into the finish because we didn't have any brakes left. Because these were, you were running these roads at ridiculous speeds and having to brake hard to, stop in time for turns. The 24-hour rally was about 650 miles, and with brakes, of course. You had, brakes in between. And while the average speed for the event might be 30 miles an hour, you try and average 30 miles an hour on backcountry roads, twisty, iced up, and all that stuff. It was lunacy. No, it's called sports car rallying. That was the name of it. And the New England Winter Rally was, a premier event, as was the Northeast Rally Championship Series, but that was run in nicer weather. When my daughter was born, I had a lot of things change. First, you had an energy crisis, and we couldn't even refuel a lot of the cars on a consistent basis because gas stations were closed in those days, and would close once they ran out of gas to pump. As I say, I had to give up a lot of things when my wife got pregnant. There was just no money for a lot of it. I sold my shares in the flying club and stopped flying because my wife did not really like flying in small planes. Mainly Cherokees and Cessna 150s. I started out at Westchester County Airport in New York, and then we had block time that we purchased at a discount out of a small dirt field in New Jersey, not far from Philly, called Moorestown, Mount Holly. I did that with my rally navigator because, we split the cost. But I say when you get married and have kids, everything changes. Well, yeah, as I say, I always remember the time I thought I was the world's greatest interviewer, but I didn't know that Angelo Patti had been told, answer anything he asks. Just keep him off the subject of drop-in replacements for R12. That was funny. I thought I was so good. And then I found out what they had done. Because they could have canceled that interview. Said, our guys are not available. But they decided they didn't want to do that to me. And they just made it clear to Angelo and Flavio, whatever he asks, answer it. Well, I didn't know there were going to be any, anything like that from Chrysler, or anybody else for that matter, because we had a blend available from DuPont, and we didn't want that, because we didn't like the idea of dealing with blends. There were too many problems in trying to recover and recycle blends. If there is another chemical, I don't know what it is that would meet the requirement of having a 150 or lower global warming number. We do have another refrigerant that we're talking about, but it's basically an azeotropic blend of 134A and YF to lower the cost. And we're going to be looking at developing standards for that. We talked about that today in the committee meeting. It's being used in Europe. That's a retrofit. We're just talking about retrofit, yeah. It's a interesting, thing. As the old line goes, may you live in interesting times, which is a Chinese curse, actually.